How y'all doing? Welcome. But before we start anything, we first need to talk about what happened today. And um, I ain't gonna lie, I really haven't even dealt with it. But for those, I'm sure the world should know. But DMX passed today. Um, we are unclear on the way the press and the way people have handled his deaths has been horrendous. One moment they're saying he's dead, next minute they're saying they're not. One moment they say it was a drug overdose. Come to find out, it might actually be because he got the COVID vaccine. We don't know. Unfortunate thing we know is he dead, and I'm fighting back tears, y'all, because this is how it is for Black people, right? It's just we just have this constant wave of trauma, trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. Um, so I shared this on Twitter how, like, I'll just be real, like, when Pac died, like, I was young, I was only like maybe 12 or 13, so of course I listened to Tupac, but but X when X 98, I was 15, 98, 99 when It's Dark and Hell is Hot came out. I was 16, 17. My brother had that CD. Like, we was listening to that in the car. So you talking about somebody who I was listening to as a teenager. And the thing is, right, like, it's crazy because X is a type of artist that I appreciated more as I got older. So there was things that I listened to as a 16 or 17-year-old that I understood later in my life as I got in my 20s and 30s, right? And I just remember conversations. Shout out to Streets. If you see this, that me and Streets had literally just breaking down his lyrics. And this dude was talking. And the thing about X, right, is his story was so raw and transparent that he spoke to my struggle, right? And he spoke to so many other people's struggles and trauma. Um, so first, let's just take a moment, reflect, and take this moment for Dark Man X.
Hey, thank you for that. Um, wow. So just a range of emotions right now. Um, and first, I'm thankful to be on the platform and here with you to have this conversation about healing in our community. And I think the life of DMX, um, may his soul be at peace, it speaks to what we're going to be talking about tonight as far as the trauma that we experience as a community. Um, where do we go when we have been traumatized? And do we even recognize when we have experienced trauma? And as we've talked so many times before, Travis, like, trauma has become so normalized in our community that we don't even recognize when behaviors that we experience as a community, when that's painful, when it's something that should not happen to a child, to an adult. We just kind of take that as that's just how it is in the household. That's just how it is in my family. That's just how it is in our community. And so that's something that not only we have experienced as members of the Black family, but we've also have seen how when trauma is not healed, what that can turn into. And it turns into us not being able to establish healthy relationships with ourselves, relationships with friends, with family. And now we see how it's spilled over into social media, where in certain platforms, there's just kind of hatred being spewed against brother to brother, sister to sister, sister to brother. And when we are in that type of dysfunction, we can look at it and say, oh, look how we behave. Look at this. But we all know that that's stemming from some unhealed trauma. And so what we're hoping is that through this series that we'll begin to unpack that, and begin to talk about healing, talk about pain, create a safe space so that members of our community understand that this is how you create a safe space. It's important to do that. It's important for us to begin to talk about how we're feeling, what we're going through, and not to internalize. And so this is just the beginning of several conversations that will follow, but we're hoping that everybody definitely tunes in, joins the conversation, so that they can begin their healing process. And then as you begin to healing, you can pass it along to your friends and family.
Yeah, and Kat, so I guess because we see, this is the thing, y'all, like Black healing is heavy, y'all.
It is.
And y'all know, for people who know me, y'all usually see me, I'm more upbeat, but like we just deal with so much stuff, so much as Black people. And so of course we had to jump right into it. But I guess we can step back and do some quick introductions for those who don't know us. So
yes, the intro. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you good. No, I'm glad though, right? Because that means we're not even focused on ourselves, right? We just we here, we just messengers. So we are members of the International Black Freedom Alliance, which is an organization, Pan-Africanist organization fighting for the freedom of Black people, of African people all over the world. We believe that Black people are smart enough, skilled enough, got the tools and the ability for us to get free. So I am the director of Black Revolutionary Education. And I'm gonna turn it over to Kai to let you talk about her background, so she can talk about her background. But so y'all know that Kai is actually on our Black Healing team, and hopefully, if you notice in the titles I said, so we have a director of Black Organizing, and we have a director of Black Power. So hopefully you can hear in all of our titles, right? We intentional. Everything we doing is black, blackity, black. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to one of our members of our Black Healing team, Kai. So if you can introduce yourself and give your background.
Yes, thank you. I was so excited to be here. I just jumped right in. Yeah. But no, thank you so much, and I'm so happy to be a part of the organization of IBFA. I love the work that you're doing, and also the plans of what's to come, especially as it relates to healing. So yes, my name is Kaii Marie. I am owner and founder of Kaii Marie LLC, which is a wellness business that's based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And my focus is holistic living, and teaching people and showing people through my personal experience how to begin to heal from childhood trauma, and through healing from childhood trauma, that also you begin to recognize patterns of behavior that may be our self-sabotaging patterns of behavior, and also learning how to establish healthy boundaries with friends, family, coworkers, anyone that you are in communication with. So that's a part of it. I also, part of that holistic living also encompasses mind-body therapy. I specifically focus on yoga and meditation. And then I also have a podcast called the Healing Element Podcast, which focuses on healing from historical and generational trauma. So it's interesting because that podcast, initially when I started it, it was to definitely focus on our trauma that we've experienced historically and generationally. But I also have had guests on there who were from the white community. I was just kind of doing a mix of different people that were able to bring different techniques to the table to show us how we can heal. And lately, my podcast is solely focused on Black people. But I think it happened organically, and if that's how I'm being led, then that's how I'm being led, because it's important for us to have these conversations. So I'm excited for this series, and I'm also, of course, excited for our conversation tonight.
Yeah, So y'all know the official title I came up with is "Get Your Healing." Yo, so like, and I'm glad y'all can see it on video and not just read it, so y'all can hear the emphasis. I'm like, yo, you need to get your healing, fam. My black family, my black brothers and sisters, get your healing, and that's what this series is all about.
Yes.
So,
And
Kai,
so we opened it up with just talking about the reason for us to have this conversation. And so we're kind of just go back and forth, just kind of talking about our thoughts. And if anyone has any comments, please be sure to just drop in the chat, and then we can either answer a question or just make sure that you're included in a dialogue. Anything that comes up for you resonates with you. We've had several conversations about what we've been seeing in social media.
yeah,
And the interesting thing is that I appreciate that, Travis, what you do is you always want to get to the root problem. Like you'll see what's going on outside, but you're like, no, but where is this really coming from? And so
right,
I
right,
think
right, right.
because of that like aligned with me. I was like, yeah, I like how you think. And so we wanted to get the root of what we were seeing, because we were seeing a lot of Black men and Black women unable to really communicate. And we knew it was much
Yeah.
deeper than that. So I guess with that being said, do you want to dive into that a little bit? What we were kind of seeing on.
Yeah. So and what I'm thinking, right, is it's just like let's look at the big picture. Um, so 1492, right? So we heard everybody heard some variation of this story of 1492. Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue or something or whatever, right? That was the beginning of it. It's all, yo, like this is when this all started. So around, I think it's like I don't know the exact date, 1510, 1511. Columbus brings African slaves to what it becomes the Americas, right? So um, none of this was called America, Puerto Rico, Caribbean, none of these names, right? Mexico, none of these names existed. Um, so that the area that I like to call west of the Atlantic, but Columbus and continual other Europeans bring Africans over here. They wipe out masses of community of the indigenous people who are already living here, set up colonies, and colonize our people. Right. So, not getting too deep into that, but the biggest thing, and I was thinking about this, and even since I just read today, made this clear to me. The biggest problem we're dealing with stems from this. It stems from the fact that we have been taken away from our homeland, that we have been taken away from Africa. So let me give y'all this example. My middle child, my second daughter, she had this skin condition, and we just kept going to the doctors, kept on going to the different pediatricians trying to figure out what was going on. Eventually, we found a brown pediatrician, and she said, "You know what the problem is? Is where you live." So listen to this. The literal diagnosis of the literal pediatrician diagnosis of the problem with my second daughter's skin was because of the area that we live in.
Wow.
Do y'all see the example I'm trying to
Wow.
make? So what I'm saying is because we literally were not made, right? And I don't want to get into a scientific argument on where we belong geographically, but we our ancestors lived for hundreds of thousands of millions or however long the earth existed in the continent, on the continent of Africa. Only since the past 500 years have we started to live here. So so that's just environment. So think about what we've lived in: slavery, Jim Crow, something like, look at this, right? Shout out to my people in St. Louis, for people who may not be aware of this. Um, Everywhere there's a highway, right? Highways were built through what became predominantly black areas. So literally a lot of our hoods and projects, etc., ghettos, quote unquote, are places that have highways running through them. So when I did my research on St. Louis, near Ferguson, this area has one of the highest infant mortality rates. You may not understand that. What that means is that a lot of Black women, unfortunately, are having problems with pregnancy because they are breathing in the fumes from highways. Like, people aren't supposed to be living in conditions where you have fumes from highways and exhaust. And then, like, look at Flint, Michigan, right? They don't even have healthy running water. So what I'm saying is, right, and so that's just the environmental, the material, the physical. But then let's go and look at the other components, right? Spiritually, psychologically. Like, think about this identity loss that we've experienced. And I don't want to get like too far. So look, think about, what have you learned about your ancestors and your people? Do we even know ourselves? Like, we can't even really talk about like, only thing we know is that we come from the continent of Africa. Right? We don't know. Some people have been fortunate enough to figure out they're from this tribe. We don't know. Only thing we know is that we're from a continent. So you add all this stuff up, like our whole entire being, like, just to get biblical, right? In a way, like, we living in a broken world. Like, we are in a foreign land. And if you think about it that way, right? People, I say dispossessed for those who have it here, right? But if you think about people who have been taken from their land, ripped apart, enslaved, lynched, shot by the police, food deserts, highway pollution, lack of running water, on and on and on and on. What do you think will come out of that? And I'm saying that's what our real issue is. It's definitely not each other.
Right. It's so true. And when you said that, it made me think of something. I just pulled it up. And this is something that I have brought up on my, when I do like holistic trainings, like continuing education trainings. And I showed this wellness wheel. And on this wellness wheel, this was developed by Dr. Bill Hetler. He's co-founder of the National Wellness Institute. And he developed what's called the 6 dimensions of wellness. And it's emotional, occupational, physical, social, intellectual, and spiritual. And so when we take a look at all those different components, that's what helps us. That's what's a part of us being well. And what you just laid out, when you're looking at how our experience in this country and through colonialization, all of those dimensions of wellness were impacted. Our spiritual systems, right? We were cut off from that. Intellectually, everything that we were taught and learned from maybe a tribe or ethnic group or tribe that we were from, that was lost, right? Social, now you're forced into a totally different social construct. You have language barriers, you're not sure what's going on. As far as when you arrive, you are stripped from family, community. Physical, you have the physical violence. And then occupational, whatever you were before you were sold, your livelihood is gone. So what happens? You have a broken person. There's every area of our being, who we are, has been impacted by this system. And so what you're so right when you said something is wrong with us, something happened to us. So what happens a lot of times is when we're looking at the outcomes, and it's so easy to look at the outcomes and focus on that and say, we are just a dysfunctional group of people. But we have to get to, well, how did we get to this point? You know, there's a structure in place that feeds off of our dysfunction. Because if we got well, And we started to look at all those different dimensions, and we started to begin to work on ourselves. The system as it is could not function.
Yeah.
Because look how it works very hard to make sure that we don't have discussions like this.
Yeah.
To make sure that there is constant friction. Because it feeds off of us not being well. So once we start making these strides to say, okay, what does a healthy community look like? What does a healthy family look like? And as we have discussed before, I think the great part about this is that we can decide what that healthy community family looks like. We do not have to look to white society to tell us how we should structure our families, what our healing should look like. That's something that that we must do because white society is built on our chaos. So they're not going to say, here's a roadmap for you. And this, start doing these steps, and this is going to help improve your lives. Whatever they give us, it is going to be poison.
And that's a good point. And the brain, I'm glad you brought that up, because that goes back to another point about the way. So what was important and what governed and what led and the way we lived our lives in Africa is much different from what's important, what's led, and the way that white people want us to live our lives here in America. Right. So on one hand, on a very theoretical scholarly notion, right? In Africa, we weren't governed by gender, right? They didn't have these gender roles. They didn't have gender arguments in Africa before colonization. Pre-colonial Africa was not organized by gender, right? In fact, we didn't even have a concept of gender. And in fact, even people right now, I know of some of my hood dudes from Richmond, Virginia, if I start talking about gender, they gonna be like, what you talking about, Travis? Right? Some people like gender. What is gender? What you talking about, right? So these are white ideas, right? So then if we think about the Mike Brown situation, right? What if this was just a class and culture? So he was just some things I understand was that he was walking in the middle of the street. And I don't know if this detail is accurate, but just for the example, let's just say is normal. This is how Black people carry ourselves, right? Maybe this might be the way we're used to. This is where our ancestors might have lived, where we didn't have specific walking patterns that the world expects us to live by, right? So what if this was just whenever he was walking down the street, this is just what Black people do? Or what if in this neighborhood in Canfield, Black people just walk through the middle of the street? But when the police come in, literally policing and holding up the white way of doing things, saying that the way you exist is wrong, right? The way that you be, the way that you live, your culture is wrong. If you have your hair the way that me and you have it, Kaii, that's considered unprofessional. If you dress a certain way, then you're quote unquote ghetto or whatever, right? So this is just who we are as a people. And so I'm saying, and so to go along with exactly what you said, this brokenness is because there's literally a cultural clash, a literal you cannot be yourself in this American culture, in this white world that we live in. And so that brokenness is both individual and communal. So we as a community get punished with dealing with this trauma and pain, with the only crime being that we're Black.
That's heavy. Yeah. That's so heavy and so deep, because it makes healing so challenging, because this is also confusion, right? So you're continuously traumatized. You're told to go to therapy.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, how therapy is in the Western world, does that work for us? Does it work for us? And if someone is listening to this and they are going to therapy, I am not knocking that at all. Please do what you have to do, what's best for you. I'm just generally speaking that if if we are a communal people, not if we are very much so a communal people, does it work for us to go to a therapy appointment, sitting on a couch, a chair, and rehashing the trauma that we've experienced to someone, especially if it's a white person that has had a totally different experience than us? Is that true healing, or are we just rehashing trauma and it's just like, at least I got that off my chest, and then we still haven't begun the healing process? So I think that even how we look at healing, we have to begin to see, what does healing look like for us as a community? It could mean that, you know what, we're going to do a healing circle outside in the grass under the sun with some fruits, vegetables, water, like maybe that's what healing is supposed to look like. Maybe it's not supposed to be in a building, in a chair, the small office space. Maybe that seems too closed in. Maybe that doesn't feel natural to us. So I think even that we can expand and define, what does healing look like for us? Maybe it's using crystals, maybe it's using sage, like all of that. We don't have to limit what it looks like for us to become well.
And so Kyle, I guess we can kind of switch. I kind of want to interview you now. Since you've actually, and this is what y'all, we call it Black healing, right? Not just healing, but Black healing. So two things. One, I would say that I know the training that psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., they don't get anything on healing for Black people. I've been through, I don't know how many counselors, even right now. And it was funny because I got in an argument with somebody and they was like, you just need to go see a therapist. I'm like, I have been going seeing a therapist and they've all sucked, right? They haven't been able to help me with what I've been dealing with. True story. For those who don't know my my job situation, I was unjustly fired. I went to one of the last counselors. I actually started recording this because people wouldn't believe me. During the counseling session, she started talking to me about how I should have performed differently as a professor. Listen to this. I am saying that I am suicidal. I want to give up life on life and I'm trying to make it to the next day. And her response was, well, like, maybe you were kind of going kind of heavy, kind of fast in your new job. Why are we talking about this right now? She actually said this in the middle of the session.
It's crazy to me, but also understanding that this system is structured in a way in which, and you know better than me, is structured in a way where our academia and everything that we're taught is from a lens of whiteness. Yeah. So in the lens of whiteness, Black people cannot be victims, right? They're inherently bad.
Wow.
Right. So for example, how many of those listening or watching have watched one of those like Drug Inc. shows, like about people that sell drugs, right? And so if it's a Black guy, right, you hear just how much, whatever he's pushing, how much he's made, he's maybe doing this for his family. When they tell the white guy who's selling drugs, oh, Johnny, he lost his mom. There's like a whole narration. When he was growing up, what happened to his sister?
Wow.
There is no story of, when they tell our story, it is not about our humanity at all.
At all.
It's that these people are inherently bad.
Yeah.
Right. If white people do something bad, there's something that caused that to happen. They had a rough time. Period in their life.
Mental illness. They love
mental illness,
right?
Right. And so even when I watch, now it sounds like all I watch is drug shows. But I was watching this other program. They were talking about like where drugs are coming in from. Right. It was like white people had nothing to do. It was just amazing to me. It was like they were just sitting back and drugs are flowing into communities.
Just dropped in your lap.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden they started taking the drugs and we don't know what, but then, Timmy started taking drugs because his mom, and I was just like, seriously?
Yeah.
I mean, so this is what happened is that they humanize whiteness. Whiteness has value in this society. So therefore, if a white man went to that same session as you did, he would have received a totally different type of response.
Wow.
If a white woman, that wouldn't even had to happen. She
Right,
would have,
right.
that wouldn't even have been a discussion.
Karen, what's wrong, Karen?
Right.
Oh my gosh. Karen,
exactly. But for us, and especially for Black men, never seen as the victim.
Yeah.
So, and I'm saying this even if you're going to a therapist who is Black, because when we're going into these to get help from therapists or professors, many of them they've been indoctrinated to have these belief systems that basically would they identify with whiteness of what they're being taught. And this goes all the way back to, Carter G. Woodson, where he talks about the education of the Negro.
Yep, miseducation of the Negro. Yep.
Right. So these white institutions, they can hire Black people who who adapted the same type of ideology of white supremacy. And they could say, hey, we hired your Black people. We're not racist, but they can carry out the same type of behaviors that a white person would. And so that's why I'm so happy that you're doing this series and that we're having this discussion, because I also think part of healing is for us to begin to think critically.
Yeah.
And that is also a part of a way to make sure that you are also putting safeguards with your mind, body, spirit, by beginning to think critically, because we're not meant to be like, oh, let us help them. And
I would say that, and I'm sure you would agree that we actually we do support people going to therapy.
Yes.
We just support people going to a good therapist who's not going to demonize you and victimize you. And so if you know good Black therapists who actually I'll shout out Ocean Gatson, my man. I don't know if he's watching or not, but I shout him out. But if you can find a good Black therapist that you can trust, then go to them.
Right.
But these rest of these jokers, like,
yeah, there's a couple I will share with you. I know Brandon Jones is one.
Okay.
Tiffany Jenkins. She's a woman that I recently had on my podcast. She is. Yes. So I recommend, because you can have a conversation with them about the experiences that you're having as it relates to race and as it relates to generational trauma. Yeah. And it's not going to be a response of, well, that's just how things are. You're going to have to get over it. It's really beginning to unpack the trauma that you experience from family, from friends, and then also looking at the larger issue of this systemic problem that exists in this country, which creates a situation of us experiencing these type of traumas, if that makes sense. So they can kind of put it all together. And
that makes a lot of sense. And I think, and so what I want to ask you about next is what you talked about before, but like this generational trauma, right? And I guess I'll preface my question with, like, it's crazy because it's like Black people, we just have waves of trauma. And it's just like today X died, and this is the beginning of 2021. 2020 was crazy. We lost, I don't know how many people to COVID. I don't know how many people died. It was like this person. It's like, oh my gosh. Like, and this is what we was talking about, right, Kat? We've gotten to the point where we have the expectation of trauma. Mm-hmm. And that's not normal.
It's not.
Remember, just to give y'all just a little peek into kind of as we was planning this, right? Mm-hmm. She, like, both of us are crazy busy. We got a lot going on. And I was like, hey, Kyle, like, you want to meet so we can talk about it? And I didn't hear anything. And I texted her again, and I didn't hear anything. And then I called her, and I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
And at this point, this is like 2 or 3 days. And now I'm like, oh shoot, like my mind is going to the point of did something happen to her?
Mm-hmm.
And then come to find out it was, oh, she was just busy. She couldn't get to my phone call message. But like, that's not normal. I shouldn't be going to think that, like, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking about, oh, like those stories of the person who was left in the basement and nobody checked on them and they died. Like, that's not something that a normal person should be just thinking about, right? So could you speak to that, Kai, and to this generational trauma that we've experienced both from generations and from our childhood?
Yes. And it's such a good point because I do the same thing. If I don't hear, I automatically go to, oh my God, did something happen? Like something horrific. I don't even go from like, I don't even know, maybe the phone died, the battery died. Yeah, I go to, they've been kidnapped. Like somebody done kidnapped, you know, so.
They got a ransom for $50,000.
Yes, exactly. I'm like scrolling through social media. Did they post something? Did they leave a message?
Yeah.
It's so true, but that does come from that constant, it's like we're in that constant state of what is it, fight or flight.
Yeah.
And there's never a point where we can just be, because if we're not experiencing something in our community that has us kind of in that that state of like frenzy, then it's something on social media. Like Black people are constantly bombarded with trauma.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what is also happening even more than it, well, I guess it's always happened, but it's this Black trauma and watching our trauma has become so profitable. So people are making money off of our trauma.
Okay.
Right. I'm not going to say names of organizations.
Right. Like
but there are whole organizations and people that make money off of our trauma, and many of them look like us. Yeah. And so part of us taking our power back, taking our story back, is beginning that healing process. And so when we're looking at generational trauma, really quick before I go to that healing process, we're looking at what our parents went through, what their parents went through, and so on and so forth down the generational line. And so we're looking at to say, okay, when my mom gets, let's say, for example, gets upset with me and she throws a shoe or says, go grab a switch, where is that coming from?
Yeah. Wow.
Like, why does Susie in suburbia say, Tommy, mom said not to do that? Now, why does my mom say, I told you not to do it? Grab my shoe, like, why am I grabbing a branch? Like, what is happening here? So what happened that there's a total different response to sit down, have a conversation for why mom, father, have a conversation with daughter, son to say, listen, when we go in the store, just don't get any, like, why can't we have like a calm conversation like that versus you better not ask me
y'all nowhere.
Right. It's like, why is that? So I think the thing is, as we begin to ask the questions, why, and we begin to reflect in our own lives of maybe how we speak to people, like, do I find myself that I'm quick to jump on Black people and quick to cut off a Black business because I didn't like the customer service, but I'll keep going to white businesses that have shown me the door, wouldn't hand me back my money, but put it on the counter
20 million times.
Right.
Chipotle will always mess up your order.
But you
go
keep
to
going
a Black
back.
restaurant one time. Oh, I ain't never coming. See, this is why
I don't support Black business. Now,
right.
That one restaurant, that one Black restaurant has now, colored your view of all Black businesses. So we have to look at, so where is that coming from? And what I have found on my personal journey is as I started to ask why and not just so quick to react. So before I kind of get into reaction mode, like, whoa, why am I feeling that? And that does take a lot of self-control, especially when you're quick to respond, quick to act, like, whoa, where is that coming from? And as we begin to think about where is that quick response or how I respond, where that comes from, that connects right back to our childhood. So then we have to look at, so when we look at what was modeled around us, mom, dad, guardian, whomever was in our life, the adults in our life, what was the relationship that we had with them, they had with us? And what did we observe about the relationships around us? For example, my mother grew up in a house full of girls. You yelled to get what you needed. You yelled to get attention. So that was how she learned to get her point across. Now, when I would say, Mom, why are you yelling? She said, I'm not yelling, I'm talking loud.
I'm not yelling. Why are you saying I'm yelling?
I'm just talking loud. Like, okay. But that was a learned behavior. So as we begin to question our why we respond a certain way, act a certain way, not in a judgmental way, but in a extending grace and compassion to ourselves, because we want to heal. We want to ultimately heal.
Yeah.
So it's not about saying, oh, why do I do that? It's like, I wonder why I respond that way. Yeah. I wonder why I'm thinking like that. As we start to realize, like, oh, these are patterns that I learned from childhood, we begin to understand, okay, so mom, dad, those are patterns that they learned. So how they spoke to me and dealt with me, it really had nothing to do with me. That was because of their unhealed trauma. And then we can, if you have that relationship, if you're able to talk to your parents about their childhood, and some of our parents will not talk to us about their childhood. It's that painful. So if it's that painful that they refuse to talk about, you can probably gather this is some deep-seated trauma that even to touch that is extremely painful. And when that begins to happen, it has been my experience that our parents, we begin to remove them off these high pedestals of, they should know this and they should know how to do that because you my mom and dad. Like, you should know how I want to be treated. And we begin to look at them as people.
Yeah.
And you become more compassionate, still establishing those healthy boundaries, but you do become more compassionate, saying, wow, mom, like, wow, mom, wow, dad, like, what happened in child? Like, what did you go through that you never had the opportunity to heal from? And that goes, and we can go all the way back to, to our community that's here in America, when through slavery, there was no healing that took place. And I'm sorry, I can go on and on and on, but I'll stop there. But so I think a lot of it's that compassion for each other, but that compassion comes when we begin to do our own healing.
Yeah, and you said something there on. I was just going to make sure that the listeners hear, like, to be clear, because I don't want to use the quote unquote deficit model, right? That Black people are just backwards, ignorant, under that. Like, we actually believe the opposite about us, right? And because I saw this one talk for Black healing of Black men. And the first thing it said was that Black men are toxic, hegemonic, and patriarchal and privileged. I'm like, if I want to get healing, I don't want your introduction to me and say, hi, hello, toxic masculine man. How are you doing? Right? Like, I want to understand, like, what's going on with me, right? So I just want to be clear. And this is for the rest of the series, like, we don't start with blaming Black people, right? What we're saying is there have been generational issues that have been beyond our control that our parents dealt with, that our grandparents dealt with, that our great-grandparents dealt with, that our great-great-great-great-great-great-great, all the way back to our ancestors who were raped, pillaged, kidnapped, and sold. And so that's why hopefully this kind of brings it all together. So now we're back to where we were in the beginning, where this is directly related to the taking of our people from Africa. So then really, right, like, this is why people talk about reparations and restitution and restoration, because, like, we aren't responsible for this. Right? And if we could understand this, then this can bring, like you said, Kaii, that joint was dope the way you described that. Because then we can have compassion to our parents and compassion towards the people who came before us. Because they was getting licks and getting hit the same way we are. And unfortunately now, it's just that it's built up over generations.
It's true.
So transitioning to, so let's start talking about healing as we close.
Mhm.
So there were our ancestors did have some healing techniques, right?
Mhm.
Like during slavery, and whether it was the root doctor or the natural herbs that we were able to use. Um, to you, I guess generally, what does black healing look like, Kat?
It looks like
Because I remember you talking about before how like dancing could be healing.
dancing, music, and music that we create for us.
Mm,
I'm not necessarily talking about mainstream because that music, if you're listening to the lyrics, or I don't understand the lyrics half the time. But is that music bringing healing to mind, body, spirit? But yes, through dance, we are a people that love the drum beat. We are
mm,
people that love to dance, to move, to sing, to write. That self-expression. We are people that love to be out in nature.
yeah.
And I think what healing looks like is beginning to go back, and this happens slowly, right? Because we've been so conditioned to do the opposite of what makes us well. Um, and so, yes, we are the first creators. I love that. So we've been conditioned to operate in spaces that are not well for us. But if we go back to beginning to listen to music
Yeah.
that uplifts the spirit, um, maybe even eating more fruits and veggies, like it.
Mm,
That I'm not saying vegan. I'm not even
yeah.
touching that part, but eating more life sustaining foods, fruits,
Yeah.
vegetables. Like I said, dance, any type of self expression, I think is something that is important to part of our healing. And also reflection is big.
Yeah.
Again, taking a moment to pause. Maybe it's having a meditation practice. Maybe it's doing yoga.
So,
Maybe
Kat, real quick, who created yoga?
that originated in Africa.
Yeah, that joint blew me, y'all. That's what white people do. They would take
Yes,
something, have you thinking, y'all, we were the ones who created yoga. This is
yes.
crazy. But keep going, Kat.
Though it's true, and that's the thing. I will say this: on my journey, what I start to do is go back to ancient practices.
Yeah.
Whether it be um, considered Indian, Chinese medicine, ancient Chinese medicine, whatever it is, I go back to ancient practices because I know in there it originated with my people.
Yep.
Right? So I look at what are the ancient practices. And when you look at the ancient practices, it's all about mind, body, spirit. How do you have internal flow within your body?
Mm,
And so that's one thing to look into. How do I have internal flow? It could maybe meaning looking into acupuncture. It could be looking into Tai Chi. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes when you go into these spaces, such as yoga, such as a Tai Chi class, depending on where you live, it can be predominantly white, right? So you can
right.
maybe find yourself once again not feeling comfortable, not feeling that you are supported. But now there's a lot of stuff on YouTube that you can go to, and there's a lot of Black yogis popping up as well. So anything like that where there's flow, movement,
Mm,
dance, music, I think that's helpful. And
yeah.
reflection is big, and starting to
Yeah.
ask why and starting to think critical. I don't know if
So
that
what would
answered
you
your question.
no, that does. What would you recommend? I mean, just because like right now, so many people are mourning and hurting from ex dying, right? What would you say to those people, and those people being me?
Yeah, I
I am those people, pressing those people. Like,
I'm gonna
yeah, what
show
would you
you. I'm
recommend for
grabbing
us?
these books. I don't have the other book. I apologize. It's the other
It's all
book
right.
is the one I referenced. It's a restorative yoga. I'll try to see if I can pull that up. But one book that has been helpful for me to understand, to put everything in context and understand what the grieving process and what we've gone through. this actually helped start me on my journey. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. This book comes with a workbook.
Thanks.
Right? So if you're like, I don't know where to start, I just know that I need some help. Yeah. Even if you take this book and use the workbook, that's what I've done. And you can even do that with your family, right? That can be a family, sit down, get some music, right? We got to have some music, put that on, maybe burn some sage, and just set the environment that you're able to create space for healing. Yeah. Okay. So this book comes with the workbook. So that's something that you can start to work through. And that can begin to help that puts our trauma that we experience into context. Yeah. Another book that I've been working through, hopefully you can see it. It Didn't Start With You.
Oh, wow. That's good.
By Mark Wallen. This is another book in which this talks about generational inherited trauma and how it can pop up in our lives. And sometimes there's a story of one woman that had certain phobias, and through doing the work that he outlines in this book, she was able to trace back her phobia that it actually stemmed from something that her grandmother went through.
Wow.
So this is another book that I recommend. And I think those two are great starters to start to do that inward work. But again, now this was written by a white male, right? So I recommend this first, then this book, and then I think that can then help. But also it is important to make sure that you are looking at books written by people in the Black community, because it is going to have a different take on us healing from trauma. But I'll definitely get a list together, and I can give you that.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, shout out to Prez and his question. Like we need, because I'm thinking about, because it's funny. So sad story. Preston actually lives in the hood that I grew up in now, so it's crazy. They're like he's there. But I would just say for fellas, those of us hood dudes, women from the hood, those of us at the bottom, like y'all, we gotta get together. And for all Black people, right, we are communal. So I would say, as much as possible during these tough, hard times, link up with somebody, right? Do not be alone, right? The best way. So what I started to do when I was still on Facebook, I used to have basically like a black. That's what we called it the Black Lounge, but it was just like Black people getting together, and that joint just brought so much life, yo. And that's the thing, y'all. We need each other, right? And oh man, oh my gosh, Kai, we didn't even mention it. Ubuntu.
Yes.
Wow. All right. I guess we'll close with that and see if we have any other questions. But yo, so our whole framework for the IBFA is centered, because we're Black, right? We're Black everything. It's centered around Ubuntu, which is African way of being, an African ideology. Ubuntu is I am because we are. I am because we are. So that means that our identity, the way we live, the way we move, is connected to other Black people, right? So we understand ourselves better, then we can understand our community better. And as we understand our community better, we understand ourselves better. All right. Kai, do you want to take Preston's question, or you want me to do that?
Oh, about we. I think that it can be a part of the healing process.
Okay.
And I want to say this, because when we say for us to be healed, I'm always hesitant to say healed.
Okay.
Because healing is a journey.
It's a journey.
It's a process.
The process.
Yeah. And there can be times where you're like, oh, I'm over that.
Yeah.
That don't bother me no more. And something comes along and triggers that, that you thought you were over. Right?
Yeah.
So healing is a journey. And also I think that takes the pressure off of, say, if you do hit that bump in the road where you're like, oh, I thought I was over this.
Yeah.
Like, extend grace to yourself. And healing is a journey. And I look at it as a journey as a cycle. So there are cycles where we're going to be doing like, where we're like maybe a little smooth coasting. And then there's going to be a cycle where there may be challenges. So also, if you look at it that way and not in a linear fashion, that can also help alleviate some of that pressure of, if I mess up, that means I'm going backwards. No, it just means I'm going through a challenging cycle right now.
Wow.
So that has been helpful. And, you know, when we look at healing in a society that is sick, that is challenging.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about tonight is heavy, is hard, because it's not as though we can remove all Black people from this toxic environment and put them in this like utopia society and say, now you can begin your healing journey. Like, you have to begin it in the midst of chaos and with the pressures being constant. So that's why we continue to say, be compassionate to yourself, grace to yourself, take a break from social media. If you need some alone time, have alone time. Or if you want to say, I want to go for a walk, I don't feel like talking to somebody, but I do want company. You can do that. Like, hey, have a friend. You want to just go take a walk with me? I just need somebody there, but I don't want to feel like talking. I don't know if anyone's kind of ever been in that type of space. So if that's something that works, you can do that as well. But I think what we have to do is begin to explore what works for us. Like, what does a healing process look like when you are constantly being traumatized?
Yeah.
That's something that I think we're going to have to navigate through together, which is why I like that you keep saying communal, because the trauma is not going to stop. If anything, it's going to continue to escalate, which is why having conversations like this and beginning the process is so important.
And I think the good question for Preston about weed, right?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I'm not going to condemn it. And I think it's been so like demonized that like I'm not going to condemn it. What I would say, what I'll be cautious about weed, and this is anything, when you're by yourself. And so if you're literally, it's like you're dependent on that thing to heal you. So smoking by yourself, drinking by yourself, etc. by yourself, then like what happens then is all those thoughts just recycle in your head. And so like the weed or whatever, like it might help for a little bit because it's gonna like change your thinking. But then when it wears off, then all those thoughts gonna come back. So I would say like just be it's not about the substance in and of itself, right? It's about that offers a temporary relief, but we need to get to a point where we actually go through the process, right? And so I would say any substance, right? Not to demonize a particular substance. I mean, because the crazy part is we can, like, anything can be quote unquote weed. Like, we can really use another person, right? And I'm saying this in a when we literally just use that person, right? Not in a relationship where we loving each other, giving back. We can literally use people in that same way, right? So
because some people use TV. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was gonna say some people use TV as a coping mechanism, so that way they're not dealing with the entire
series.
Yeah.
Like a whole entire series, right? Yeah, exactly. TV, other people is not just, and that's the thing, right? And this is why we need to stop getting mad at each other, because somebody who will watch a whole entire series on Netflix or drink 3 cups of coffee a day would turn around and say, look at those Negroes who just smoking and drinking and look, I don't do that. I don't do those things that y'all doing. What's wrong with y'all? It's like, hold on. You're still doing the same thing. You just change the substance.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly. And it's all still hurting your body, right? So so I would just say, y'all, like, community, right? Ubuntu, right? We need each other, right? And like we say, like Preston heard me say this before, we all we got, you know.
Mhm.
We all we got. So get your healing. Don't do it alone. Black healing is with somebody else. It's not by yourself.
Right.
Yep.
Agreed.
So any more questions? Because we actually right at an hour.
If I could, I just wanted to
Yep.
put that other book.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I'll put the link in there.
Hold on, which one? The Jordan.
Gail Parker.
Oh yeah, that one.
Yes, I wanted to just put that one in there, so people can also check that out. Because she does talk about how healing could look for us.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess the so next we gotta come up with, we're gonna give you all some more topics. So be on the lookout for more topics of the series. Get your healing series. Today we talk about the foundations. And I like the way you said that, Kyle. Let's get to the root of what's going on, right? Like so much of our arguments on surface level is like, actually, you got some unhealed trauma you haven't really like dealt with. And you saying this Negro trash and she this and she that is really like, yo, you need healing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's the other thing, right? Until you get to the root, nothing will work.
True.
Like you will always, there's always going to be some surface level thing that's going to piss you off or that's going to lead you down a certain path. So until we get to this root and what we talked about today, we're not even going to start the process.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah,
excited.
It's going to be good. Well, you got any closing words, Kyle, for the series? Or?
I'm just so happy that we're having dialogue about the trauma that we experience as a community. Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm on a committee, and it's a committee that focuses on issues in the Black community as it relates to substance use. And we talk about, and what we're focusing on is generational trauma.
Wow.
And these are other Black folks from substance use counselors, therapists. They're like, what's really missing from our training?
Wow.
We're not talking about generational trauma. So I was on
That's kind of scary though, right?
Like,
yes! 2021, y'all haven't been talking about generational trauma.
Nothing.
Like, yes, y'all finally getting it, but
this
long, is where our parents messed up, right? Because nobody say anything.
Especially since you have so much writing about historical and generational trauma regarding the Jewish community and also the Native American community, and besides,
except for Black people.
Exactly. So I was just like, I was happy that these counselors were noticing that this was a huge gap missing in what they were being trained on as how to address the needs of our community. And they were also talking about how racism plays into, I was just sitting there like,
wow,
this is happening. So all the work that everybody is doing, it may be a slow uphill chug, but it is I'm seeing it in this committee that's not, I guess would be considered kind of like mainstream. And they're having these talks about the racism that exists, the structure that exists, and our need to address generational trauma and develop education modules that address that for therapists and substance use counselors. So
that's good.
It's good. We're getting there.
We are. Well, I'm going to close with a shout out to our organization, the IBFA, the International Black Freedom Alliance. Go check us out, theibfa.org. If you want to tap in, it's theibfa.org/join. What we're doing, we believe that Black healing is foundational to Black freedom. And that's what it is, y'all. We about to get free. Thank you for your time, and be on the lookout for the next video in the series. Peace.